rhythm section is directed by Reed Morano, written by Mark Burnell, and it stars Blake Lively, Jude Law, Sterling K. Brown, and Raza Joffrey. So I saw a trailer for this movie a few months ago. I wasn't too excited about it or too enamored with the concept of it, but I like a pretty good suspense movie or spy movie or whatever it is, and so I was like, yeah, sure, let's give it a whirl, see what it's like. The story revolves around Stephanie, who's played by Blake Lively, who's a young woman who is suffering from survivor's guilt after her entire family dies in a plane crash. She spirals downward into addiction and prostitution, and that's where we find her when the movie starts. A reporter finds and contacts Stephanie and tells her that the plane crash that killed her family wasn't actually an accident, but it was a terrorist attack. She eventually meets Jude Law, who's an ex-MI6 agent who begins training her and preparing her so she can go take revenge against the men who killed her family. Overall, it's pretty standard revenge plot stuff. It feels a little bit like Taken at times, a little bit like John Wick. A character finds a list of people and they go about trying to kill them all. In terms of the characters and the performances, I was pretty underwhelmed. I mean, Jude Law feels like he is phoning this performance in. I feel like he got offered a large sum of money for a small amount of time and he was like, yeah, sure. And he just brought nothing to this role as this MI6 agent to make me believe that he actually was an MI6 agent. I never believe him in this role ever. I just see Jude Law, who's kind of wearing a lot of sweaters. Blake Lively, I think, she is in basically every single scene of this movie. I think she is actually in every single scene in this movie. So Blake Lively in this movie is interesting because on the one hand, I feel like she does a good job, with the acting part of the whole thing. She's acting pretty hard. She's acting a lot, but at the same time, I never believe it. And so I just, on the one hand, I appreciate the craft that Blake Lively brings to it, but on the other hand, if I don't actually believe it when she's acting, then that means she kind of failed at it, which is unfortunate. Because I do think that Blake Lively is a really talented actress. She just hasn't really found it in this movie. So Raza Joffrey, who plays the reporter in this film, it's a very small role, but I think he does a fine enough job. It's a pretty thankless role. There's not a lot to it, but I think he does fine in the role. I believe him as a reporter who's trying to get a big scoop on this big government cover-up. I totally buy it. Sterling K. Brown, I think, does the best in the film in terms of performances. He is this information broker character, and you're never quite sure if what he's saying is true or if he's setting you up or if he's plotting something. It's just a really cool energy, and it makes that character, who really is not the most important character in the movie, it makes him feel really powerful and really important and really cool. I think my least favorite part of this movie is the camera. The camera is so bad. I'm sorry. It's just so shaky. It's that classic bad shaky cam feeling. Every time there's any sort of action on scene or there's a chase or anything like that, the camera just devolves into swish pans and shaky shenanigans, and I can't see what's going on. It just is a mess, and I just do not enjoy the shaky cam experience at all. And not only is it shaky cam, it's shaky cam, but way too close to the character. It feels like every single shot is filmed way too close to the camera, so that they're constantly dipping in and out of frame, and you just can't see anything. It's just blur of movement all the time, and it just ruins it. The moments in the movie that are supposed to be the coolest, the most enjoyable, which are these action scenes where she's getting revenge on the people who killed her family, aren't enjoyable because they're just a visual mess. In the scenes where they're just talking or they're training or they're trying to gather information and it's more standard filmmaking, the film looks good. It has a good cinematic feel to it, and there's some good compositions. There's some smart filmmaking on display in the quieter scenes where people are just talking. But the moment anything action-y happens, it just just devolves into nothingness, and it really kills the excitement I have for the film overall. The other thing I have to talk about is the music, because it's really weird. Like, there's just some choices in the musical department that feel really out of place. Like, the music is completely opposite of what we're supposed to be feeling as an audience at that moment. It's really weird. And there's some, like, a lot of the time in the movie, it's just standard background dramatic music to help support the scene, and it works fine. And then a couple times in the movie, it pops in with this aggressively kind of pop music that just seems really out of place with what we're watching or what we're supposed to be feeling with the characters, and it just doesn't make sense, really. It just doesn't work for me at all. It's really distracting, and I just am kind of blown away at how awkward some of the musical choices are in the movie. My final rating for the rhythm section is a 3 out of 10. The film at its peak, at its best moments, is average, and that's really off-putting. But there are things in the movie that are just bad, and so that brings the rating down quite hard. And the lack of originality is on display too. If you want to watch a movie about revenge, go watch John Wick, any of them. If you want to watch an older one, go watch Taken. Taken's a great revenge flick. I would even recommend a movie like Lucy with Scarlett Johansson, which is sort of a revenge flick as well. I mean, there are so many other options that I think are actually just way better movies than the rhythm section. It feels like a mess, it looks like a mess, sounds like a mess, and the performances in a lot of parts of the movie are just kind of mediocre at best. You know, I wouldn't even recommend streaming this one. You can very much walk by, never see this movie, and be better for it. Now that I got my official rating out of the way, I want to talk about spoilers for a bit. So if you actually want to see this movie and you don't want it to get spoiled, turn off the video now. But I just got a rant about spoilers because a couple of things in this movie are insane. My main problem with this movie is that characters make decisions that make no sense. We're introduced to Stephanie at the beginning of the movie, and she is a drug-addicted prostitute who is clearly in survivor's guilt after her family died in a plane crash years before, and she's just trying to kill herself with drugs. So she is a very beaten down character. Like, you see her with her shirt off, and like you see fingerprint bruises all over her body, and it's really sad, and she's really not in a good place. It's really, really off-putting, and just sad, just really sad. It's awful. And she, gets contacted by a reporter who says, hey, I have evidence that there's a terrorist attack that killed your family, and I want to interview you for the story I'm writing. He goes on to give her an exposition dump. He tells her all this information of like, oh, it was a terrorist attack, and here's the guy who did it, and here's this mystery guy who we think was his boss. We don't know who this is yet. And he gives her all this information, and he says, I've never told anyone this. Nobody else knows about this information. And my question is, dude, you've spent years collecting this information, doing all this stuff and all this research, and you're going to just give all this information to a drug-addicted prostitute who you just met? Which makes no sense. And on top of that, he never explicitly states, what the hell can she do to help? Like, he's trying to write a story to expose the government for covering up a terrorist bombing of a civilian aircraft. That is crazy town level of conspiracy theory stuff. That's huge. That's insane. And Stephanie, who he brings home, doesn't know anything about it. As far as she's concerned, she thinks it was an accident. She didn't know it was a terrorist attack. What could she possibly do to help this guy crack this story? She doesn't know anything. She's useless to him. So him giving her all this vital, crucial information about this stuff makes no sense. And it is counter to everything he's trying to achieve as a reporter, right? He's trying to get justice for all these people, including her family. It's actually to her benefit to not tell her about any of this, because there's a very high chance she is going to screw it up somehow and invariably endanger everyone's lives in the process. Of course, it happens in a movie like this where the reporter guy gets murdered. Somebody finds out he's investigating stuff and he gets murdered, and she is left alone. And all she has is the information that she learned from this guy, and she has a set of coordinates, and she goes off and she meets Jude Law, who's this ex-MI6 agent, and he's been kicked out of the agency, and he's all rogue, and he's out in the mountains in a remote area. And this girl goes out there alone with a gun she bought illegally and finds this guy who proceeds to throw her into a cabin and have her detox off the drugs she's on. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "I want to kill this guy who killed my family." And he's like, "Well, you should hire an assassin to do it." And she's like, "No, I want to do it." And he's like, "You're not an assassin. You don't have any training on how to be an assassin. You're a drug-addicted prostitute. You're worthless. Like, you're worthless. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. You're never going to be able to find him. You're never going to be able to do this stuff." And he is 1,000% right. She has, to this point in the movie, shown no skills of any kind that would help her in achieving the goal she has stated of killing this guy. Jude Law, for whatever reason, again, it makes no sense at all, but Jude Law actually begins training her on how to be an assassin. And time passes. This is another thing that I am so confused about, is what's the time frame here? What's the time scale here? Like, she says we've spent months training. It's like, okay, to become good at, firing a gun takes several months or years to become really good at firing a gun. Transforming her physically into somebody who could defend themselves and fight somebody else takes years. Like, going from that level of awful physical conditioning to something even reasonably okay takes years. It baffles my mind. I just don't understand the time frame. Beyond that, does Jude Law have nothing to do? Like, he's an ex-agent and he's in the middle of nowhere. He's been in the middle of nowhere for a while. It's like, is he doing spy stuff? Is he retired? Is he plotting something? Is he planning to kill himself? What's he doing out here? And they never explain it. He's just sitting out in the wilderness in a perfect training ground with hundreds of acres around him, with nobody around, until this girl shows up and says, "Train me," and he shrugs and says, "Sure, I'll train you," even though there's no reason for him to want to train her or believe that training her is a good idea, and he explicitly states that it's not a good idea and does it anyway. This movie just makes no sense. It feels like one of those things where they said, "Hey, we need to get our main character to this point in the story. She needs to get trained on how to do all these things, and we want to get her in this location doing this kind of stuff with these kind of stunts," right? These are the scenes we want to film for the big finale of the movie. The last 40 minutes of the movie, we want all these action scenes to happen. But the problem with that is that to do that, you have to completely ignore any and all interior character logic. Jude Law is a confessed murderer. He says in the movie that he murdered a woman because she murdered his wife. Okay, fine. So he has murdered before. He has nothing to lose. He lost his family. He lost his job. He's in the middle of nowhere. He's doing nothing. And this cracked out prostitute comes to his house, tells him that her entire family is dead and that nobody knows where she is or that she traveled there. And you're telling me this guy doesn't immediately shoot her in the head and bury her in the backyard? It is only in his best interest to kill her and then get rid of the evidence, especially given the fact that no one's going to look for her and that there are no witnesses at all. Come on. Like, it just does not make sense for him to, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we're going to go for a Rocky montage and we're going to train you up to be an assassin so you can go kill a guy I could kill myself in 5 minutes. That's the other thing. Like, Jude Law is sitting around doing nothing, and this girl shows up and she says she wants to kill a guy, and he goes through all the trouble of training her and then helping her find these people and then, setting up the stings on how to kill them and all this shit. He could do it by himself in 5 minutes. He's got years of training and all of this experience. He could do it like that, but he doesn't. It's such a waste of time. It's so clear that the filmmakers just wanted to have it be a Blake Lively going around being a badass kind of thing. But no, it doesn't work that way. Like, you can't just have every character in your movie make stupid decisions that don't make any sense given their stated character histories and objectives as human beings, and just have them all ignore them in favor of your main character just because it's your main character. That is horrible writing, and it just completely ruined this movie. Okay, so after Jude Law trains her, she proceeds to go out and completely screw up every single assassination she goes on to, right? All she's supposed to do is go in and shoot these people in the head and leave. That's her whole deal. Or stab a guy in the neck and leave. That's her job. She goes in, and every time, she does it like 4 times. She goes in and she just sits around and doesn't actually kill the guy. And then the person fights back. She gets her ass kicked like you would. And then she barely escapes, whether through, subterfuge or through a car chase or whatever else. She barely escapes. And then next time, she still doesn't learn her lesson, and she gets in trouble again. She is actually so bad at it that she not only fails to kill her target, that Jude Law then has to come in and use a car bomb to kill the guy she failed to kill, and in the process ends up killing a 10-year-old and a 9-year-old and a couple other people. So her being bad at her job caused the deaths of children that were completely innocent because she's horrible at what she does. So the whole movie, she's shown to be awful at being an assassin. And the thing that's baffling about this is at the end of the movie, the final scene of the movie, is Jude Law finds her and says, hey, something like, I hope we never meet again. And she's like, yeah, I hope for your sake, you're right. And then she turns away and starts walking down the street, and it cuts to a frontal image of her like this, and it cues up this like girl power, like, yeah, you're such a strong, independent, powerful woman, like, yeah. And it's like, no, like, what? Like, what are you talking about? That's not the lesson of this movie. Like everything she did in this movie was bad for her. Like, she was self-destructive at the start of it. She then goes on to become a murderer. She then goes on to become a bad murderer and causes the deaths of innocent people because she's a bad murderer. And then you have the audacity to tell me that because she murdered a bunch of people, now she's a fulfilled person who's found her, like, center as a human being and her calling, and she's a badass now? Are you kidding me? She got her ass kicked by a cripple who had asthma. Like, Jude Law, who's like a trained assassin, should again just murder her and walk away. Like, she's a massive liability. Like, it makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. It makes no sense. All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching my review of the Rhythm section. I hope you enjoyed it. If you guys like the content, don't forget to do all that standard YouTube stuff, like, comment, and subscribe, please. I'm a new channel trying to grow and all that stuff, so it would really help me out a ton. Anyway, until the next time, see you guys later.